The first thing I noticed when I stepped into my parents' house was not the smell of pot roast or the polished shine of my mother's china, but the silence. It pressed against me like a storm front, heavy and expectant. My father stood by the dining table in his usual stance, shoulders squared like he was still on a parade ground, his eyes scanning me as if I were a soldier under inspection instead of his daughter returning from training. My mother smiled too brightly, her fingers trembling as she took my jacket, her voice brittle as glass. And then there was Madison. My sister sat waiting at the end of the table, her lips curved in a smile, but her eyes sharp alive with a gleam that made my stomach twist. I had seen that look before in the eyes of fellow soldiers about to ambush an enemy. I told myself to breathe, to remember discipline, but my instincts whispered one word: trap. I barely had time to sit when Madison moved. One moment she was across the table, the next she was behind me, a cord of electric wire flashing in her hands. The cold bite of it pressed against my throat before I could speak. She pulled tight, her breath hot against my ear. "You are no hero, Naomi." Her words seared into me more than the wire cutting my skin. My chair toppled backward under the sudden force wood cracking against the floor as pain shot through my shoulder. My hands clawed at the wire, my nails scraping, but Madison pulled harder, her face twisted with triumph. I gasped, each attempt at breath strangled into silence. My legs kicked against the floor, searching for leverage that would not come. My mother froze near the oven, tears streaming down her cheeks, but no movement to stop her eldest daughter. My father barked orders like this was some kind of training exercise, his voice booming about respect and discipline as if my struggle for air was punishment I deserved. My chest convulsed. The world narrowed into black edges, closing fast. I thought of the field exercises of carrying comrades across mud of nights, shivering in rain, where I had told myself pain meant survival. But nothing had prepared me for this. The betrayal of blood. The betrayal of the sister who once braided my hair when we were children, who now was bent on ending me. Spots filled my vision. My heart thudded slower, weaker. I could hear the rasp of my own choking, a grotesque drumbeat. I wanted to scream, but only managed a ragged whisper. Then silence. The world went black. For a sliver of eternity, I felt nothing. No pain, no sound, only the chilling void of absence. I was gone. They told me later my pulse had stopped, that I had flatlined on the way to the Army hospital. But in that darkness, I knew it. I knew my sister had dragged me across the line between life and death. When light returned, it was sterile and blinding. Rough hands pressed against my chest, voices shouted codes, machines beeped erratically. My throat burned as air was forced back into me, as if fire had been poured down my lungs. I coughed, my body arching under the pressure. The monitors spiked, then steadied. A doctor's voice rose above the chaos. "We have her back. The soldier is back." I opened my eyes to the harsh glow of fluorescent lights and the antiseptic sting of a hospital ward. I had been revived, pulled back from the void. But the memory of Madison's whisper echoed louder than the machines. "You are no hero." It replayed over and over, cutting deeper than the bruises around my neck. Lying on that gurney, I realized something brutal. The war I thought I had been fighting was not the true war. The battles overseas, the drills, the exhaustion, those were hardships I chose as a soldier. The real enemy had been waiting in my own home, wearing the face of my sister, empowered by the silence of my parents. My body trembled beneath the thin hospital blanket, my pulse fragile, but my mind sharpened with clarity. I had been silenced once. I would not be silenced again. That night, staring at the ceiling tiles of the Army hospital, throat, raw breath shallow, I made a vow. The Carter family had declared war on me, and I would fight back. Not with weapons, but with truth, with exposure, with the discipline that had carried me through every field exercise. I flatlined on the table, but death had not claimed me. Instead, it had stripped away every illusion. I saw my parents not as protectors, but as accomplices. I saw my sister not as blood, but as my assailant. And I saw myself not as their scapegoat, not as the invisible daughter, but as a survivor who had been forged in fire. The monitors beeped steadily beside me, marking each fragile beat of my heart. Each sound was a reminder. They had tried to erase me. They had failed. And so the war truly began. I lay in the hospital bed with my throat bandaged and my voice little more than a rasp, but my mind would not rest. Every beep of the monitor reminded me of breaths stolen and returned, and with each sound I was dragged back to memories that explained how I had arrived here. The Army taught me to analyze, to trace back, to study the terrain of past battles before launching the next strike. And the battlefield of my family stretched years behind me. From the very beginning, the Carters were not a family, they were a chain of command. My father, Colonel Harold Carter, lived with the iron certainty that discipline was love and obedience was survival. In his world, rank meant everything, and in his home, he wore his rank like a crown. My mother, Donna Carter, floated in his shadow, soft-spoken, quick to tears, always smoothing over his harshness with excuses that sounded like lullabies but cut like barbed wire. Then there was Madison, 2 years older than me, always the golden child, the favorite. I had grown up in the same rooms as her, breathed the same air, but somehow I was the invisible one. When we were children, my father applauded Madison for singing at school concerts, for smiling at neighbors, for her charm. When I came home with a science award, he barely looked up from his newspaper. When I made varsity track, he muttered that running was useless unless you were chasing an enemy. At 12, I learned what favoritism looked like when Madison shoved me down the staircase during one of her tantrums. My arm snapped against the wooden railing and I cried in pain. My father looked down at me sprawled on the floor and ordered me to stand up, to stop being dramatic, to toughen like a soldier. I was a child begging for comfort, but all I received was a lecture on resilience. Madison was not punished. She was comforted. That was the story of my life. At 16, I told them I wanted to join the Army. I wanted out, wanted a future beyond being the family's scapegoat. My father's response was a slap so hard my ears rang for hours. He sneered that women were too fragile for combat, that I was delusional to think I could ever be more than a support role. My mother sobbed in the kitchen, telling me I had provoked him, that I needed to understand his stress. Madison smirked and said maybe I would look good in a uniform fetching coffee. That night, I stared at my reflection and decided their contempt would not chain me. I worked harder, trained harder, pushed my body until the gym mats burned under my sweat. When my acceptance letter came, I left without looking back, but the shadows of my family followed me everywhere. In the Army, I found what family should have meant. Brothers and sisters forged not by blood, but by shared suffering. Drill sergeants who broke us down but also built us up. Comrades who carried me across fields when I collapsed from exhaustion, who shared rations when hunger gnawed at our stomachs. For the first time, I was seen. For the first time, my effort counted. Yet every time I returned home on leave, the old poison waited. My father dismissed my promotions as flukes, my mother fussed over Madison's minor career changes, and Madison herself never stopped undermining me. She would tell neighbors that I was only a low rank, that medals were handed out like candy, that real heroes were politicians or businessmen, not soldiers like me. I remember the day I received the Army Commendation Medal. I had worked harder than I thought possible, endured nights of drills, weeks of missions. When I told my family, my father barely looked up from his coffee. Madison burst out laughing, saying that it sounded like a participation trophy. My mother reminded me gently that Madison had just landed a new job and maybe we should celebrate her instead. The sting of those words never left me. Every accomplishment was buried beneath their indifference, every failure magnified. I pushed on, telling myself their approval was irrelevant. But deep down, it burned. No matter how many comrades saluted me, no matter how many missions I completed inside, I was still that child on the staircase begging to be seen, begging to be loved. Now, lying in the Army hospital after surviving the wire around my neck, I saw the pattern clearer than ever. The attack was not sudden. It was the culmination of years of erosion. Madison's jealousy, my father's control, my mother's silence. They had trained me to believe my worth was conditional, and when I proved them wrong by thriving in the Army, they tried to take it from me. They wanted my benefits, my housing, my pension, as though my sacrifice was their entitlement. and when I refused, Madison resorted to violence. Thinking back, I remembered nights when I ate alone in my room while the rest of the family laughed in the kitchen. I remembered bringing home perfect grades only to have my father compare me to Madison's charm. I remembered how at my high school graduation they clapped louder for Madison's attendance than for my speech. These were not isolated moments. They were training exercises in cruelty. Emotional undulation swept through me, even in the hospital bed. I wept for the child I had been invisible and starved for approval. Then anger surged hot through my veins, anger that I had survived war zones only to be nearly killed in my parents' dining room. Fear clawed at me too, because if they could justify this once, what would stop them from trying again? But under it all was resolve steady as a soldier's march. This time I would not return to silence. I would not excuse them, not protect them, not bury their sins. The army had taught me strategy and endurance. My family had taught me pain. I would combine both. I would use the discipline of a soldier and the memory of every wound they inflicted to fight back. I thought of Madison's whisper, "You are no hero." She was wrong. Heroes are not born from applause. They are forged in struggle. And my struggle had just begun. When I was finally discharged from the Army hospital after days of monitoring and questions from military investigators, I told myself I would not return to my parents' house. Yet duty leave came, and with it an insistent phone call from my mother. She wept about misunderstandings about family dinners and reconciliation. She pleaded that Madison was sorry that my father wanted to talk things through, that blood should not be divided by anger. Against the instincts that screamed caution, I went. Part of me still clung to the idea that maybe, just maybe, they would see me differently after what had happened. Soldiers are trained to walk into dangerous terrain, knowing the risks. But that night, my battlefield was a dining room, and the enemy wore the same last name. The house looked the same as it always had, spotless, in the way my mother maintained it, photographs of Madison smiling at birthdays and graduations covering the walls. There were only a few pictures of me tucked into corners, half hidden behind vases. As soon as I entered the dining room, I knew it was not a reconciliation. The table was set with my mother's best china, a performance reserved for occasions when appearances mattered. My father stood tall at the head of the table, posture rigid, eyes unreadable. Madison sat with her arms crossed, a smirk dancing across her face. The smell of roast and gravy hung in the air, but it was the manila folder beside my father's plate that turned my stomach to stone. He did not waste time. As soon as we were seated, he began. "Naomi, your sister has been working on a proposal." He said it like a general announcing strategy, not a father addressing a daughter. Madison leaned forward, her voice syrupy, rehearsed. She explained that military finances were complicated, that handling allowances, benefits, and potential housing loans required expertise. She said she had a plan to take over my financial management to make sure everything was properly handled. She spoke as if my years of training, my deployments, my survival meant nothing, as if she had the right to assume control simply because she was Madison. Then came the number. In exchange for her services, she would receive 25% of my pay and benefits. She said it smoothly, as though she were discussing the weather, her eyes glittering with triumph. My father nodded gravely, his large hands folded on the table. He said family must share in success, that it was selfish for me to think my service belonged to me alone. My mother kept her gaze on her plate, occasionally murmuring that Madison was only trying to help, that it would be less stress for me. I sat frozen, the words crashing over me like mortar fire. 25%. They were not asking, they were demanding. Madison already saw herself redecorating my apartment, controlling my accounts, parading my sacrifice as her profit. I clenched my fists in my lap to stop them from trembling. Emotional undulation struck me hard. One moment, rage boiled so hot I wanted to flip the table. The next, grief washed through me, that this was the value my family placed on me. I thought of the nights in the field when I barely slept, the hunger, the bruises, the sweat, the prayers whispered under my breath before missions. I thought of the friends I had held as they cried from exhaustion, of the funerals I had stood through for comrades who did not make it home. And now, here was my sister demanding a cut of blood-earned currency as if she had marched beside me. I answered with steadiness I barely felt. No, my benefits are not for you. My service is not a family business. Madison laughed, not loud but sharp mocking. She said I was ungrateful that without the family's support, I would never have survived training, that my achievements were inflated by pity. My father slammed his fork onto the china, the sound like a gunshot. He ordered me to sign to recognize my sister's role, to stop embarrassing the family by acting as if I alone had achieved anything. My mother reached across with a shaking hand, whispering that I should compromise, that family harmony mattered more than stubborn pride. In that moment, I saw it all clearly. This dinner was not reconciliation. It was an ambush planned and executed with precision. They had chosen the meal, the folder, the words, believing I would be cornered into submission. My pulse raced, my vision sharpened. I was back on a battlefield, except this time the battlefield was draped in lace tablecloths and porcelain. I straightened in my chair and said firmly that my service was mine alone, that no one had the right to claim a share of what I had bled for. The silence after my words was suffocating. My father's face darkened. My mother's lips trembled. Madison's smile twisted into rage. For a moment, I thought she might leap across the table again. She did not, but her eyes promised the violence was not over. That night, as I drove away from their house, the streetlights blurring past, I felt both drained and strangely alive. They had revealed themselves fully, their greed, their entitlement, their contempt, and though they had tried to trap me, I had refused. Yet deep in my chest, a new fear grew. I knew my family. They would not stop with a failed dinner. They would escalate. And I, Naomi Carter, soldier of the United States Army, would be ready. The days after the dinner felt like marching through mud, each hour heavy with memories I could not shake. The bruises on my throat from Madison's wire had begun to fade, but the deeper marks were invisible, carved into memory. Lying awake in my apartment, I could not stop replaying the years that had brought me here. The Army taught me that wounds left untreated fester. So I let my mind walk back into the past, into the long corridors of my childhood, where every step explained the present. At 12 years old, I learned that pain in our family did not lead to protection. Madison had shoved me down the staircase in one of her fits of jealousy. My body hit the steps hard, my arms snapping as I landed. I screamed for help. My father came not with comfort, but with anger. He ordered me to get up, to stop being dramatic, to show toughness. My mother hovered behind him, wringing her hands, murmuring that accidents happen. Madison cried crocodile tears and was hugged for being upset. I sat on the floor with a broken arm and realized love in our house was not unconditional. It was rationed like supplies, and I was always the last in line. At 16, I gathered courage to tell them I wanted to enlist in the Army. I spoke with fire in my chest, convinced that if I showed them my ambition, they would finally see me. My father's response was a strike across my face so sharp my ears rang. He shouted that women had no place in combat, that I was embarrassing him with childish fantasies. My mother sobbed into a dish towel, repeating that I should not provoke him. Madison smirked from the doorway and said maybe I could serve coffee in uniform. That night, I locked my door and cried into my pillow, but the tears hardened into resolve. If they would not believe in me, I would believe in myself. I trained harder, pushed my body until blisters tore on my hands, until my lungs burned. When the acceptance letter came, I walked out of that house with my head high, but inside, I carried scars. In the Army, I found a kind of family I had never known. Brothers and sisters forged by sweat and exhaustion. Drill sergeants who broke us down but also rebuilt us with iron discipline. I remember one night during training when I collapsed from fatigue. Instead of mocking me, my squad lifted me up, carried me until I found my footing again. That was the first time I realized belonging was possible. That was the first time someone saw me as worth carrying. But each time I came home on leave, the contrast tore at me. My father dismissed my rank, saying I was still low, that real achievements belonged to officers and men. My mother diverted conversations back to Madison, praising her charm and looks. Madison herself twisted every success into mockery, telling neighbors that medals were handed out like candy, that I was nothing more than a background player. I remember the day of my Army Commendation Medal. I called home hoping just once they would be proud. My father barely grunted. My mother congratulated Madison on a new part-time job, and Madison laughed at the idea that a medal could mean anything. That laugh has never left me. It was the same laugh she carried into the dining room when she demanded my benefits. It was the same laugh she wore when she pulled the wire around my throat. These memories crashed through me in waves, each one alternating between sorrow and fury. Emotional undulation kept me on edge. Some nights I wept until my chest ached, mourning the child who had longed for love. Other nights I clenched my fists and swore I would never let them reduce me again. My body carried reminders too. Old scars from training mixed with new bruises from Madison's assault. Each mark told a story. Each mark whispered that silence was complicity. The Army had drilled into me that when under attack you either fight back or you fall. My family had trained me too, but in cruelty. Now I would merge both trainings. I thought back to my father's words whenever I faltered. He used to say that discipline was everything, that only the strong survive. He was right about survival, but wrong about strength. Strength is not cruelty, it is endurance. I had endured their neglect, their gaslighting, their favoritism, and now I would endure their rage. The flashbacks did not stop. I remembered sitting alone in my room, listening to them laugh downstairs, remembered handing over my allowance so Madison could buy clothes, remembered watching them celebrate her minor achievements while ignoring my major ones. Every slight, every dismissal, every wound had been preparing me for this moment. I understood now that the attack at the dining table was not sudden madness. It was the natural outcome of years of entitlement and jealousy. Madison had been told all her life she was the center, and when I dared to shine brighter, she struck to extinguish me. The realization hardened into resolve. The wire had nearly ended me, but it also awakened me. I was not a child anymore. I was not the invisible sister. I was a soldier, and soldiers do not retreat. That night, staring at my bruised throat in the mirror, I whispered to myself a vow. They will not bury me with silence again. They will not profit from my sacrifice. They will not twist my service into their entitlement. I would gather evidence, I would expose them, and I would make sure the world saw what they had tried to hide. The past had wounded me, but it had also armed me, and I would use every wound as a weapon. After weeks of restless nights and too many cups of bitter coffee, I accepted the truth. If I wanted to survive the Carters, I had to treat them like an enemy force. Not with weapons or fists, but with strategy, patience, and evidence. The Army had trained me for operations requiring meticulous planning. Now I would deploy those skills against the people who shared my blood. My closest ally was Ethan Miller, a fellow soldier I had trained with during field exercises. Ethan had the kind of loyalty forged only in the crucible of exhaustion and danger. When I told him what happened, he did not dismiss it or soften the edges. He looked me in the eye and said, "Then we fight back smart." He came to my apartment one evening with his laptop, his calm presence a reminder that I was not alone. We set up folders, organized timelines, and created a strategy. Emotional undulation rolled over me as we worked. One moment I was trembling with shame that I was documenting crimes committed by my own sister and father. The next moment I felt a surge of power, seeing their manipulations reduced to files and dates stripped of the secrecy they had thrived on. The first piece of evidence came easily. My phone was filled with text messages from Madison, demanding money, threatening to embarrass me if I did not hand over part of my benefits. Some messages dripped with mockery, calling me a toy soldier. Ethan helped me back them up onto a hard drive, labeling each one carefully. Next, we pulled up my email where I had saved copies of messages my father had sent to one of his fellow officers. In them, he downplayed my rank, implied I was unstable, and suggested Madison should be considered trustworthy with finances instead of me. Reading his words made my chest ache, but I forced myself to keep scrolling to highlight every line that revealed his contempt. The betrayal of a father still cut deep, but evidence was evidence. Then came the photographs. Ethan steadied the camera as I unwrapped the scarf from my neck. The bruises had turned a sickly yellow and green, wrapping around my throat like a grotesque necklace. My hands shook as I held up the wire I had found hidden in Madison's closet weeks earlier, proof of her intent. Ethan clicked the shutter without comment, but his jaw tightened. "You need to show the world what they did," he said quietly. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. The Army had taught me to log every injury, every incident. Now I was turning those protocols inward. Each piece of evidence became a weapon. Each weapon gave me strength. Still, waves of doubt battered me. At night, I lay awake wondering if I was betraying family by exposing them. My mother's tearful voice echoed in my mind, begging me to keep peace. But then Madison's whisper replayed louder. "You are no hero." That whisper was my fuel. I thought of the comrades I had lost of the funerals where we saluted the folded flag. They had given everything. If I let my family erase me, I would dishonor not just myself, but them too. I pressed on. Ethan and I began collecting witness statements. A neighbor recalled hearing shouting the night of the attack, hearing my father order me to obey. One of my Army friends remembered seeing bruises on my arms when I returned from leave bruises I had hidden under sleeves. Each testimony was another brick in the wall I was building against the Carters. We compiled financial records too, bank transfers showing the money I had sent home during Madison's repeated job failures. Medical bills I had paid when my father insisted insurance would not cover his procedures. Each receipt was proof that I had been their lifeline while they ridiculed me. Looking at the stack, I felt alternating currents of devastation and pride. Devastation that my family had taken so much. Pride that despite their neglect, I had survived, provided, endured. Ethan reminded me that in operations, morale is as important as ammunition. He made sure I ate, made sure I slept, made sure I remembered that I was more than a victim. His steady presence kept me from collapsing under the weight of memory. Slowly, a plan took shape. We would present the evidence first to military legal authorities, then to a broader audience if necessary. We would strip away the Carters' mask of respectability. But before that moment came, I needed to prepare myself mentally. Emotional undulation tore through me. Some days I woke with fire in my chest, convinced I would win. Other days I curled on the couch, grief crushing me that this was my family. The Army had taught me that weakness could be temporary if discipline guided you through. So, I leaned on that discipline. I woke early, ran until sweat cleared my mind, then sat down with Ethan to organize files. Each step was a mission. Each mission was survival. The night we printed everything onto paper and slid the documents into a thick binder, I felt my pulse race. It looked official, undeniable. No longer whispers or memories, but hard evidence. Ethan placed the binder on the table with care, as if it were a weapon ready to fire. "This is your shield," he said. "And your sword." I stared at it, my throat tight. For years I had begged for scraps of validation. Now I held in my hands the truth of my suffering and their guilt. A soldier knows that before an attack comes the stillness. That night I felt the stillness settle over me. The calm before I marched into battle, not with guns or grenades, but with words, photos, and documents. My family had underestimated me my entire life. They thought discipline meant silence, obedience, submission. They forgot discipline also means precision, resilience, and the refusal to quit. As I closed the binder, I whispered to myself, "They will see me now, not as their scapegoat, not as invisible, but as the soldier they tried and failed to destroy." The night I returned to my parents' house with the binder tucked under my arm, the air felt like the tense silence before a firefight. I parked my car at the curb and sat for a long moment staring at the familiar front porch. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles whitened. This was not a homecoming, this was a mission. I had walked into villages overseas knowing every shadow could hide a threat. But walking into my childhood home carried a weight no battlefield ever had. The binder on the seat beside me was heavy, not just with paper, but with years of silence and scars. I stepped out, straightened my posture, and marched toward the door. My mother answered with a watery smile that collapsed the moment she saw my determined face. She tried to take my coat to usher me toward the dining room, but I brushed past her. I was not here for pleasantries. I was here for truth. My father sat at the head of the table like a commander on his throne. Madison lounged beside him, eyes glinting. Her lips curved into that mocking smile that had haunted me since childhood. The scene was staged, just like before the china, the polished wood, the food set out untouched. They wanted control through ceremony. I pulled out a chair, slowly set the binder on the table, and let the sound of it landing echo through the room. No one spoke. My father's jaw tightened. My mother wrung her hands. Madison raised an eyebrow. I opened the binder, the pages crisp, the truth undeniable. I slid the first set of photographs across the table. Pictures of my bruised neck, the purple and yellow marks wrapping like a grotesque necklace. My father's face darkened, but he did not reach for them. Madison snorted as if it were all exaggerated makeup. My mother gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth, tears brimming, but still she said nothing. Next, I laid down printed text messages, demands from Madison for money threats laced with mockery. I highlighted the words she had typed: toy soldier, useless hero. Each word a scar made permanent. Madison laughed, her tone sharp. "Those were jokes, Naomi. You are too sensitive." I did not flinch. I slid another sheet forward, an email from my father to a fellow officer. He had written that I was unstable, that Madison should be trusted with my finances, that I could not manage my own benefits. Reading his betrayal aloud made my throat tighten, but my voice stayed steady. "You wrote this about me. You undermined your own daughter to promote Madison." My father slammed his palm on the table. "I did what was necessary for this family." His voice boomed, but for the first time it lacked the authority that used to silence me. I pushed forward financial records receipts, bank transfers, money I had sent home during Madison's failures, medical bills. I had paid for my father's surgeries, my mother's treatments, Madison's therapies. $42,000 in total. I read the number slowly, clearly letting it hang heavy. While I ate ramen to pay off loans, I covered your needs. While I slept on treatment tables, I sent Madison rent money, and you sit here telling me I owe you more. My mother whispered my name, a plea, but I cut her off. I am not your wallet. I am not your scapegoat. I am your daughter, and this is what you did to me. Madison leaned forward, her voice sharp. You are making a scene. You have always been dramatic, Naomi. This family supported you, gave you everything. I stared at her until her words faltered. Supported me. Was it support when you shoved me down the stairs and Father told me to toughen up? Was it support when you mocked my mettle, when you tried to choke the life out of me? Was it support when Mother stood frozen as you pulled that wire? The silence was brutal, suffocating. My father's face turned red, veins bulging in his temple. You will regret this, Naomi. You are turning against your own blood. My voice shook, but I did not lower it. Family does not strangle each other. Family does not steal from each other. Family does not bury their daughter's achievements in silence. My words cracked something in the air. My mother burst into sobs. My father pounded the table again. Madison sneered. The emotional undulation crashed through me like a storm. My hands trembled with grief. My chest heaved with anger, but under it all was calm clarity. For the first time, I was not begging to be heard. I was declaring. I stood slowly, gathering the papers back into the binder with measured movements. Each page slid back like a piece of armor. My father barked about loyalty, about respect, about duty. Madison hissed about betrayal. My mother begged for peace. I snapped the binder shut with finality. This is not loyalty. This is exploitation. I will not play the silent daughter anymore. I will not carry your secrets. I turned to leave my pulse pounding. Behind me, Madison shouted, You think you are strong now, Naomi, but without us, you are nothing. I paused at the doorway and looked back. No, Madison. Without you, I am free. And then I walked out into the night air, my lungs burning, but opened my shoulders heavy but upright. For the first time in years, I felt the strength of truth in my hands. I knew this was only the beginning. the confrontation had not ended the war. It had only drawn the battle lines clear. The night after confronting my family, I sat on the floor of my apartment staring at the binder that held my life in pages. My hands hovered over it like it was a weapon waiting for deployment. In the Army, we were taught that secrecy protects the enemy and exposure dismantles them. My family had thrived in silence for years. It was time to break that silence in the most public way possible. Ethan sat across from me, his laptop open, his face calm, but his eyes fierce. "You are ready," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement. I nodded, though my stomach twisted with fear. Fear of fallout, fear of shame, fear of what would happen when I told the world what had happened inside the Carter household. Yet under the fear burned a sharper flame. I would not be their victim anymore. The first step was filing with JAG, the Judge Advocate General, the legal body that oversees military justice. I scheduled an appointment dressed in uniform, binder in hand. The walk down the hallway of the military building was longer than any march I had taken in training. My boots echoed against the tiles, each step a drumbeat of resolve. Inside the office, a captain listened as I laid the binder on his desk and began to speak. My throat tightened, but I forced the words out. I told him of the attack of Madison's wire, of my father's emails, of the financial exploitation, of the years of manipulation. I presented the photographs, the texts, the receipts. I watched his expression shift from polite formality to grave attention. By the time I finished, his jaw was set. "We will investigate this," he said firmly. "You have done the right thing." Relief and terror crashed together inside me. Relief that someone finally believed me. Terror that my family would now know I had turned to the law. When I left the building, the sunlight felt different, sharper, as if the world had shifted slightly on its axis. That was only the beginning. Ethan and I prepared the second step, something that would ensure the truth could not be hidden. We scheduled me to speak at a local veterans gathering, a hall filled with men and women who understood sacrifice, who knew the price of silence. The night of the meeting, I stood behind the curtain, trembling. My palms sweated, my pulse raced. Ethan squeezed my shoulder. "You faced death on a table, Naomi. This is just words. Step out." I stepped onto the stage and faced the crowd. Rows of faces looked up at me, some scarred, some lined with age, all carrying the weight of service. I took a breath, my voice shaky at first, but gaining strength. I told them I was not just fighting enemies overseas. I was fighting betrayal at home. I told them about Madison, about the wire, about the whisper that I was no hero. I showed the photographs, held up the receipts. Gasps filled the hall. Murmurs of anger rose. A veteran in the front row shook his head, muttering, "Unbelievable!" When I finished, the room was silent for a heartbeat, then erupted in applause. Not polite clapping, but thunderous, defiant applause. Tears blurred my vision. Emotional undulation shook me to the core. Fear had transformed into vindication, shame into strength. After the meeting, reporters approached me. The story spread through local news, then larger outlets. Headlines appeared about a soldier betrayed by her own family, about financial exploitation, about abuse covered in silence. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages, some from strangers thanking me for speaking, some from fellow soldiers saying they had faced similar battles. The Carters were exposed. Madison's name was printed in articles my father's rank mentioned, with the note that an investigation was underway. My mother remained silent, unreachable. The fallout began quickly. My father was summoned to meetings, questioned about his conduct, his authority crumbling. Madison's friends turned away, whispers following her. My mother's social circle shrank as neighbors avoided her. For years they had controlled the narrative. Now the narrative was in my hands. Yet exposure came with cost. Some nights I woke in a sweat, heart racing, terrified that someone would burst through my door. Some days I doubted myself, wondered if I had gone too far. But then I remembered the wire tightening around my throat. I remembered the void when my pulse flatlined, and I knew I had no choice but to keep going. The applause of the veterans echoed in my ears when doubt threatened to drown me. Ethan reminded me daily that this was not revenge but justice. Revenge is fueled by hate. Justice is fueled by truth. You are telling the truth, Naomi. That is all. Still, part of me relished the image of Madison reading the headlines of my father fuming as his power slipped. Emotional undulation carried me between righteous fury and exhausted sorrow. But through it all, a steady rhythm grew inside me, the rhythm of survival, of reclamation of power. Weeks passed. The investigation deepened. Reporters kept calling. My story was no longer just mine. It had become a symbol, a warning, a call to others who had been silenced. When I looked in the mirror, I saw the bruises had faded, but the fire in my eyes had not. The girl who once begged for approval was gone. In her place stood a soldier who had faced death and chosen to rise. Public exposure had changed everything. My family could no longer pretend. The world knew, and I was no longer invisible. The storm did not take long to break. Within days of my testimony before JAG and my speech at the Veterans Hall, the Carter name began to collapse under the weight of exposure. My father was called into closed-door meetings summoned by officers who once respected him. His reputation as Colonel Harold Carter had been built on decades of command, but now whispers followed him down corridors. I heard from a contact that junior officers questioned whether a man who could not protect his own daughter deserved to be respected as a leader. The Army does not look kindly on scandal, and my father's pride, sharper than any blade, began to crack. Madison's fall was swifter. The news articles printed her name, her face, her role in the attack. Neighbors avoided her on the street. Friends unfriended her. Online employers refused to take her calls. For years, she had strutted through life confident that her charm would erase mistakes, that her beauty would outweigh consequences. Now, charm curdled into mockery, beauty into isolation. She called my phone in a frenzy, leaving voicemails filled with rage, then tears, then rage again. I deleted them all without reply. My mother Donna retreated into silence, overwhelmed by the collapse. She called once, her voice broken with sobs. "Naomi," she said, "please, we are family. We can fix this." I held the phone tightly, my heart pounding, and answered with the truth that had burned in me since the night of the attack. "You chose silence, Mother. You watched and you did nothing. I choose survival." She sobbed harder, begging me not to destroy what was left of our family. I hung up. Emotional undulation ripped through me as I stood there, phone in hand. Part of me wanted to crumble into her arms like a child, but another part, the soldier forged by fire, knew this was necessary. Consequences had to fall. My father tried to fight back. He made calls, tried to intimidate reporters, even attempted to contact my commanding officer to paint me as unstable. But I had anticipated this. Ethan had guided me through every step, ensuring documents were filed, witnesses prepared, timelines airtight. The binder had become my shield, my fortress. Every time my father tried to twist the narrative, evidence slammed the door shut. The investigation expanded. Allegations of financial misconduct surfaced, of favors traded, of corners cut. His allies distanced themselves. The mighty Colonel Carter stood alone, stripped of authority he had wielded like a weapon for years. For Madison, consequences came with iron bars. She was arrested for assault, her trial date set. Cameras captured her being led away, her face twisted with fury. Watching the footage, I felt a jolt of conflicting emotions. Satisfaction that justice had arrived. Grief that my own sister wore handcuffs because of what she had done to me. Emotional undulation hit hard. Tears slid down my cheeks, even as my fists clenched with vindication. The world now knew the truth. My nights remained haunted. I dreamed of the wire around my throat, of my father's booming voice, of my mother's tears. I woke in a sweat, gasping. But unlike before, I was not alone in the aftermath. Ethan was there, steady, reminding me to breathe, to ground myself, to remember that healing is not weakness. He told me soldiers carry scars not as signs of defeat, but as proof of survival. His words steadied me. My days began to shift. Strangers approached me with quiet gratitude. Other veterans thanked me for speaking out, telling me their own stories of family betrayal and silence. My courage had given them a voice. That knowledge became a balm. I had turned my pain into purpose. Meanwhile, the Carter household crumbled. My father stopped appearing at social functions, his invitations withdrawn. My mother no longer posted cheerful updates. Madison's name became synonymous with disgrace. I heard whispers from old neighbors astonished at how quickly the proud family had fallen. Consequences had a way of reshaping everything. Still, part of me ached. These were my parents, my sister. I remembered birthdays, holidays, fragments of laughter. But those fragments had been illusions, brief distractions from years of cruelty. I could not build a life on illusions. One evening, Ethan and I sat on my balcony overlooking the city lights. He asked if I regretted exposing them. I thought for a long moment. Regret would mean I wished to return to silence, to bruises hidden under sleeves, to a life where my voice was dismissed. No, I said firmly. I do not regret it. I regret only that it took me so long. My father once told me I would regret turning against family, but regret belongs to them now. Emotional undulations swelled again as I spoke. Sadness at what was lost, anger at what was stolen, pride at what I had reclaimed. The investigation into my father deepened. Madison remained behind bars. My mother stayed in silence. Their empire of control had collapsed, and I, the daughter they once ignored, stood stronger than I had ever been. Consequences were no longer shadows I feared. They were light breaking through darkness. They were proof that justice, though slow, could arrive. As I closed my eyes that night, I whispered to myself, they tried to bury me. They forgot I was a soldier. Healing is not linear. I learned that the hard way in the months after my family's collapse. Some mornings I woke with a sense of strength so solid I thought nothing could shake me. Other mornings I lay in bed, unable to breathe, crushed by memories of the wire, of Madison's whisper, of my father's glare. Emotional undulation became my constant companion, waves of pain and waves of hope rising and falling inside me. The army had prepared me for battlefields, not for nightmares that invaded my sleep, but I refused to surrender to them. I began therapy through the Veterans Affairs program, walking into the sterile waiting room with its worn magazines and quiet hum of a vending machine. I sat with other soldiers, each of us carrying invisible wounds. My therapist, a calm woman named Dr. Lewis, encouraged me to speak. At first, my voice cracked, halting ashamed. But slowly, I told her everything from the staircase fall at 12, to the metal mocked at 24, to the wire that nearly ended me. She listened without judgment, her eyes steady. Each session was a battle. Some days I walked out shaking. Other days I walked out lighter. Over time, I realized that speaking the truth was another kind of survival. It did not erase the past, but it stripped the past of its power. Therapy was one part of my rebirth. Another came from community. I began attending meetings of a veterans support group, a circle of chairs in a modest hall, coffee brewing in the corner, the smell of donuts mixing with laughter and tears. At first, I sat quiet listening as others shared stories of deployments, of loss, of broken marriages, of addiction. Then one evening, a man named Carl, older, his hands trembling from nerve damage, turned to me and said, "You got something inside you? Tell it." My heart raced, but I spoke. I told them about the Carters, about Madison, about my father, about the years of silence. I expected judgment. Instead, I saw nods, tears, fists clenched in empathy. One woman whispered, "You are speaking for all of us." That night, I walked out into the cool air and felt something shift inside me. My pain had become connection. My story had become purpose. Soon I was asked to speak more often. At schools, at veteran events, at small community gatherings. I stood before crowds, my hands trembling at first, and told them that family can wound as deeply as war, that silence is the weapon of abusers, that speaking is the act of reclaiming. Each time I spoke, my voice grew steadier. Each time I saw eyes widen with recognition, heads nodding in solidarity, I felt stronger. My rebirth was not only about healing myself, but about helping others heal. Ethan remained my anchor. He attended my talks, cheered me on, reminded me to rest when my body shook with exhaustion. Together, we began a small program for younger soldiers, a workshop called Boundaries and Respect in Family Life. We met in base classrooms, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, folding chairs lined up. I told recruits that discipline does not mean submission to cruelty, that loyalty does not mean tolerating abuse, that family does not excuse violence. Some looked at me with wide eyes, others scribbled notes. I saw myself in them, young and eager, desperate for approval. I wanted them to learn earlier what had taken me years to understand. At times, the memories still ambushed me. A smell, a phrase, a sudden silence could drag me back to the dining room, to the wire, to the flat line. I would shake sweat, dripping heart pounding, but instead of drowning in it, I reached for the tools therapy had given me. Breathing exercises, grounding techniques, the knowledge that I was safe. Slowly, the flashbacks lost their power. Slowly, I rebuilt. One evening after a talk, a young woman in uniform approached me, tears in her eyes. She whispered that her father controlled her paychecks, that her brother mocked her service. Hearing me speak had given her courage to confront them. She hugged me fiercely, thanking me. As she walked away, I felt tears slide down my own cheeks. My suffering had not been in vain. It had been transformed into a weapon of hope. Emotional undulations surged again, grief and pride intermingling. I missed the family I never truly had, mourned the childhood that could have been. But I was also proud of the woman I had become, forged not by their approval, but by my refusal to be silenced. My rebirth was not about erasing scars. It was about carrying them with purpose. I began journaling each night, writing not just about pain, but about victories small and large. A full night's sleep, a talk that reached someone, a day without nightmares. Each entry was a testament to progress. My therapist called it reclaiming narrative. I called it survival. Ethan teased me gently about the stack of journals growing on my desk, but I knew he understood. They were my proof that healing was real, even if imperfect. Months turned into a year. I still wore the uniform, still served my country, but now I also served myself. I was not just Naomi Carter, the invisible daughter, the scapegoat, the victim. I was Naomi Carter, soldier, survivor, speaker, mentor. And though the road ahead was uncertain for the first time, I faced it not with dread, but with determination. My rebirth had come not from forgetting the past, but from using it. A year passed, and the world looked different. The bruises on my throat had long faded, but the memory of the wire still lived inside me, not as a wound now, but as a scar I carried with pride. My father's investigation dragged on his once towering reputation, crumbling piece by piece. Madison sat in prison, her appeals failing her name. A shadow whispered in courtrooms. My mother drifted quietly, no longer calling, no longer pleading, perhaps finally understanding that her silence had cost her everything. And me, I stood taller than I ever had before. The day of my promotion ceremony dawned crisp and clear. I pinned my uniform carefully, each ribbon aligned, each button polished until it gleamed. As I looked in the mirror, I saw not just the reflection of a soldier, but of a survivor who had carved her own worth out of fire. My hands trembled slightly, not with fear, but with awe that I had made it here despite everything. At the hall, rows of chairs filled with comrades, officers, and community members. The flag stood tall at the front, colors vibrant under the light. I stepped forward when my name was called. Naomi Carter. The sound of it echoed, no longer ignored, no longer dismissed. My boots clicked against the floor as I marched up to the podium. A superior officer pinned the new insignia to my chest, his voice firm with pride. "Congratulations, Sergeant Carter." Applause filled the room, loud and genuine. For a moment, tears pricked my eyes. Emotional undulation surged a wave of grief for the years I had begged my family for applause that never came, followed by the overwhelming warmth of this moment, applause earned and freely given. I scanned the crowd. There was no Harold Carter, no Donna, no Madison. Their chairs were empty as the love they had withheld all my life. Instead, I saw Ethan standing near the back, his face steady, his eyes proud. I saw fellow veterans who had clapped for me at the support hall. I saw young recruits I had mentored. This was my family now chosen, steadfast, unbreakable. After the ceremony, I was asked to speak. I approached the podium, the weight of the microphone heavy in my hand. The hall quieted. My heart pounded, but my voice came strong. I told them that heroism is not granted by family or by titles. It is proven in survival and endurance, in standing even when the world tries to knock you down. I told them I had been betrayed not by enemies overseas, but by blood at home. I spoke of the wire of the flatline of the silence that almost buried me. I told them I had chosen to fight back not with fists, but with truth, with evidence, with courage. And I ended with this. I am Naomi Carter, a soldier, a survivor, and no one, family or not, will ever silence me again. The hall erupted in applause once more, the sound crashing over me like a wave of vindication. My throat tightened, tears slid down my face, but I stood tall. For the first time in my life, I did not shrink under attention. I absorbed it. I let it fill the empty spaces carved out by years of neglect. Later that night, I stood alone on the parade ground, the stars spread above me. The crisp air bit at my skin, but my chest felt warm. I thought of Madison's whisper, "You are no hero." I thought of my father's booming commands, my mother's tears. And then I thought of the applause of the recruits I had mentored, of the young soldier who had hugged me after a speech of Ethan's steady support. The truth was clear. They had been wrong. Heroism was not theirs to give or take. It was mine to claim. Emotional undulation surged once more. A final wave of sorrow for what I had lost, pride for what I had gained, peace for what lay ahead. I whispered into the night, I am still here. I survived, and I will keep surviving. In the months that followed, I expanded my program for young soldiers, teaching them about boundaries, respect, and resilience. I launched a scholarship for veterans pursuing education funded by donations from those inspired by my story. I watched new recruits walk taller, speak louder, knowing they had a voice. I visited Madison once in prison when she requested it. She looked smaller than I remembered, her arrogance stripped away. She tried to apologize, words, stumbling, eyes darting. I listened, but did not respond. I walked away before she finished, not out of cruelty, but out of choice. Forgiveness would not mean return. Forgiveness would mean freedom, and I chose freedom. My father never spoke to me again. His career ended quietly, stripped of honors. My mother wrote letters, sometimes filled with regret, but I did not answer. I no longer sought their approval. I no longer needed it. Standing at the window of my new office at base, I looked out at the training grounds, at young soldiers running drills, their shouts carried on the wind. I placed my hand on the insignia on my chest and smiled. This was my family. This was my life. And it was mine alone. The war that had begun at my parents' dining table with a wire and a whisper had ended here not with defeat, but with victory. The final victory was not over them, but over the silence they had forced on me. I had broken it. I had rebuilt, and I was free. When I look back at everything that happened, from the staircase at 12 to the wire at 26 to the applause at my promotion, I realize this story is not only mine. It belongs to everyone who has ever been silenced by the very people meant to protect them. It belongs to every soldier who fought battles abroad, only to return home and find battles waiting at their own kitchen table. It belongs to every son or daughter who was told they were nothing, who was made to believe their sacrifices belonged to someone else, who was forced to carry wounds in silence. And it belongs to you, sitting there watching or listening, maybe feeling your chest tighten because pieces of my story echo inside your own. I want to tell you something clearly. You are not alone. You are not invisible, and you are not powerless. I know the weight of silence, how it presses down on your chest, how it convinces you to stay quiet because speaking feels dangerous. I know the fear of betrayal when the people you should trust the most become the ones who wound you deepest. But I also know the strength that rises when you refuse to let that silence define you any longer. I flatlined on a hospital table, my pulse gone, my body cold, and yet here I am speaking to you. If I could come back from that void, if I could stand again after years of neglect and cruelty, then so can you. Emotional undulation has been my companion, swinging me from grief to hope, from fear to strength, from shame to pride. And that rhythm belongs to every survivor. Healing is not a straight line. It is a battle fought in waves. Some days you will weep. Some days you will rage. Some days you will feel stronger than ever. And all of those days count. I want you to take a breath right now and think of one moment in your life where you chose survival. Maybe you walked out of a toxic home. Maybe you said no when someone tried to control you. Maybe you endured pain that no one else saw. That moment is proof of your strength. Do not diminish it. Do not hide it. Hold it as tightly as I hold the memory of rising from that hospital bed. If my story moved you, if it reminded you of your own battles, I want you to share it. Share it in the comments. Share it with someone you trust. Share it with yourself in a journal. Stories break silence. Stories dismantle shame. Stories build bridges between strangers who suddenly realize they are not alone. And I promise you this when you tell your story, someone out there will breathe easier because of it. For those of you who are parents or grandparents, I ask you to look closely at the children in your life. Do they feel seen? Do they feel valued? Do they know that your love is not conditional on charm or success? My father believed discipline meant cruelty, that only the strong survive. But the truth is, strength grows from love, from encouragement, from safety. You have the power to give that to someone in your family right now. Do not wait until regret is all that remains. For those of you who served or who have family who served you, understand the price of sacrifice. You understand what it means to give your body and mind to duty. Do not let anyone diminish that service. Do not let anyone tell you that your sacrifice belongs to them. It belongs to you, and you alone choose how to honor it. And for those who never wore a uniform but carry scars from toxic homes, know this: your battle is just as real, your survival just as heroic. Abuse and neglect are enemies no less brutal than those faced overseas. Your courage in standing and speaking and setting boundaries is worthy of honor. I built my voice from the ashes of betrayal, and now I want to hand that torch to you. Carry it. Speak. Refuse to let silence own you. Refuse to let manipulation define you. Refuse to let cruelty steal your worth. And when you falter, when the nights grow heavy, remember my words. I flatlined on the table, but my war truly began when I chose to rise. You can rise too. Let me ask you a question, and I want you to answer honestly in the comments. Have you ever had to put boundaries between yourself and family to survive? Did you ever have to walk away from blood to save your own life? Tell me, because when you tell me, you also tell every other survivor here that they are not alone. Your voice can be the rope that pulls someone else from silence. Do not underestimate that power. To those watching from across America, from small towns and big cities, from farms and suburbs, from apartments and quiet houses, I ask you to see yourself in my story not as a spectator, but as a participant. Where do you stand? Are you the one silenced? Are you the one who stayed silent? Or are you the one who will finally speak? Change begins when we choose to no longer repeat the old patterns. Change begins when we decide that silence will not win. I built a scholarship fund for young soldiers because I wanted my scars to create hope. But each of you can create hope in your own way. Volunteer at a shelter. Listen without judgment when someone tells you their story. Write your own story down, even if no one ever reads it. These acts matter. They ripple outward. They save lives. Emotional undulation is part of life, but so is resilience. We rise and we fall, but what matters most is that we rise again. I rose from that table. I rose from the wire. I rose from decades of neglect. And today, I stand not just for myself, but for every person who has ever been told they are nothing. So here is my call to you. Stand with me. Speak with me. Refuse to be silent. Refuse to be erased. And if you believe in this message, share this video, comment. Your truth, subscribe so we can keep telling these stories together. Let this channel be a community where silence is shattered and survivors are seen. I am Naomi Carter, a soldier, a survivor, and I believe in you. If you ever doubted your worth, let this be the moment you reclaim it. Do not wait for approval from those who refused to give it. Approve yourself. Do not wait for love from those who withheld it. Love yourself. Do not wait for applause from those who ignored you. Applaud yourself, because you have survived, because you are still here, and because you matter. I will close with this final thought. The Carter family tried to break me. They nearly ended me, but in trying, they forged me into something stronger than I ever imagined. If betrayal can create such strength in me, imagine what truth can create in all of us together. So comment below. Share your story. Tell me where you are watching from. Let this not be the end of my story, but the beginning of ours. Together we will rise wave after wave, undulation after undulation, until silence no longer wins.